So again, kind of going through that 80s period and then with your creation of play. So, all right, so you did the ebb and flow of, putting out a record, did you sign with a major label in the 80s?
Yeah, I signed with Elektra. And then I was with Mute Records, which is an independent label in the UK for a very long time, and they stood by me through everything, which was amazing. But Elektra, so I did Elektra's a perfectly good label, I'm not maligning anyone. But my manager, this was really funny, I thought this was funny. I was on Elektra, a new president was brought in, and my manager called up at some point and said, "Oh, so how are things going with the Moby record?" And the head of Elektra at the time said, "Well, to be honest, we're having a hard time with all of our British bands right now." And my manager said, "Moby's neither British nor a band." And I think that was when we realized I was maybe on the wrong label.
I want to have this conversation sort of thread through to the idea that I've captured a lot from reading about your, things that you've written, things that your interviews, kind of this true to yourself moment. You talked about the 80s that you went up, you went down, you went way down, and then play wouldn't be picked up by anybody, but just zoomed out of there, right? Was play sort of a pivotal moment for you in terms of the creation of it, or your realization around the commercial sides of all this and the artistic sides, or am I sensing something?
It all seemed like a complete accident, largely because it was. When play was I made it on crummy equipment in my bedroom. A Soundcraft Spirit board, it barely worked. Literally you'd be like hitting it to try and get like one of the channels to work. The budget for play was around $10,000. And this is when $10,000 was a week-long catering budget for most major label albums. So it came out, became strangely successful, and I then disappeared down the rabbit hole of touring, narcissism, alcoholism, entitlement, and that sustained me for a good 5 or 6 years.
Riding the crest of that success.
And then
that was really the commercial success then.
Well then,
that was.
And then the next few records commercially didn't do as well in the States, but actually did much better overseas. So all of my touring was in Europe, Eastern Europe, South America, Asia. So I sort of stopped really touring in North America 12 years ago. I'll do stuff here, but most of the touring was overseas, which definitely fueled, again, the narcissism, entitlement, alcoholism, etc.
But are you over some of that now?
Oh, hopefully most of it.
Most of it.
Yeah.
What was that process like for you? What sucked you away from the higher version of you?
Well, when you're ostensibly doing all these things that should be working, meaning like you've got the best publicists and you're dating the sexiest people and you're constantly on tour and you're living in tour buses and you have private planes, you have all this stuff, and you're miserable. At some point, that's when just simple empiricism, where you hopefully take a step back and say, oh, this isn't working. And then about 7 years ago, I had my sort of epiphany where like nothing was working. I was still making music day in, day out, but I was touring constantly and I was really miserable. And I went to go see David Lynch speak. And David Lynch is now one of my good friends and a hero of mine. And he was being interviewed similar to this in London. And he said something so simple. He said, creativity is beautiful. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, he's right. Like, marketing is not beautiful. Touring isn't beautiful. Being obsessed with public figure stuff isn't beautiful. But creativity is the only thing that's worth pursuing. Everything else is fleeting. Everything else is tawdry. But if you can just focus on that creativity, the ability to at least aspire to make something beautiful, that's the goal. And so I feel like as long as I keep doing that, it just increases the chances that every day I will be head over heels in love with what I do.
Thank you for sharing that. And I think, I think I think it's a reality too that, you know, you were in the churn, right? You were touring, we were reading about you, we were hearing about your star was rising, you know, you were a celebrity, right? But that had a cost, right? And you had a reset, and you wandered into a place, and David Lesh helped you reset, right?
I mean, the truth is, if we live in this culture that's obsessed with fame and money. But what's really so strange and ironic is the people who have fame and money are fucking miserable. But yet everyone else pursues it. Like, if fame and money made people happy, the Upper East Side of New York would be filled with puppies. You know? Instead, it's filled with divorce lawyers, plastic surgeons, mistresses, etc.
Empty apartments.
Empty apartments. I mean, look at like Beverly Hills, like per capita, it's like the saddest people on the planet and the wealthiest people on the planet. And I'm not saying like I don't think there's anything wrong inherently with fame or wealth, but in and of themselves, they deliver nothing. You know, in fact, and I think oftentimes the pursuit of fame and wealth keeps people from pursuing the things that actually do work, which usually are like creativity, spirituality, friends, dogs, hiking, like simple things that are much more achievable.
You know, as I read about your career and I tried to understand, you know, again, I didn't see, I guess I had a bias to understand your artistic self, you know, didn't worry, I mean, commercial comes and goes, right? It's just the essence of what your process is. Can you share a little bit about, you know, you're making a new record right now? Are you in the process of creating something? Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, I mean, are you pulled by sounds? Are you pulled by lyrics? Do you have your own personal archaeology of material that just come to you?
Well, do you know? Has everyone here seen the movie Almost Famous? At the very end, William Miller finally gets his interview. What's his name? Billy Crudup's character. And he sits in William Miller's bedroom, and William Miller says, "So, Russell, for a start, what do you love about music?" And Russell says, "For a start, everything." You know, and to me so making a record, honestly, I don't care what happens to a record once it's released, because I don't really want to tour. It feels dirty to try and convince people to buy something. So, especially music, like convincing someone to pay for music seems weird, because I don't pay for music for the most part. Like, why would I expect other people to? And I just love the process of making a record. So, and that's where the joy comes from. So once it goes out into the world, fine, I hope people like it. Maybe it'll sell, maybe it won't, I don't really care. What I care about is how do I feel about it every day that I'm working on it, you know? So it's not like if I'm playing guitar and recording guitar, I'm not thinking to myself, this isn't important, what's important is whether it sells or whether it makes me famous. It's the playing the guitar and loving that moment, like that's the important part.
Are there certain days when you go into your studio, which I assume now is a very intimate space, right?
Yeah, I have the most unimpressive studio on the planet.
But isn't that
I live in
great?
LA, and all my friends, like, I'm friends with Linda Perry. She has a 15,000 square foot amazing studio with this huge live room. Or Mark Mothersbaugh has this huge building in Hollywood. Like, all these friends of mine have these amazing, gigantic studios. I'm in a bedroom. I'm very comfortable having some equipment in a bedroom. More than that, like, I don't know what to do.
But that's also the beauty of this time. You can do that in your bedroom. You could do it, right? You can do it on the side of the kitchen. You can have record, right? I mean, you can have a couple of things set up, and you can do it now.
Yeah.
So in that, you know, again, kind of going right to that moment when you decide, I'm ready for a new album, or I have some ideas, I'm ready to put them down. Is it a process of just laying stuff down and then editing, or is it just editing and then putting it down,
so
conceiving and then putting it down?
Each record I make, it's the same process. I write 300 songs. I really do. I have about 9,000 or 10,000 unreleased songs. And the reason they're unreleased is because most of them are bad. Just to be clear, like I'm not saying I'm some
Right.
genius savant who has all this great backlog material, like a lot of it's terrible. But, so I write a couple of hundred songs, narrow it down to 150, narrow it down to 50, narrow it down to 20, and then finish those 20 songs.
So it is an editing process.
Yeah.
It's a let it all out, and then the sort of discernment, the wisdom, the ear,
Mhm.
right? The experimentation with sound along the way, right? Gets to where you want to go.
Oh yeah.
You're really in it, right?
And what I've noticed with a lot of creative, like people who aspire to do things, do creative things, they're inhibited sometimes because they edit at the beginning. You know, and like to me, editing should only happen when you're about to play it for other people. You know, every demo you make should be embarrassing. You know, you should like go listen to your demos and be like, oh, that's humiliating.
This is really-
but learn from it.
This is really, really important, not only from, from an artistic perspective, but from your life and your career development perspective. You got to jump in and try stuff.
Yeah, try stuff and
You got to not be afraid.
don't worry too much about how you're going to be perceived.
Yeah, this is important, isn't it? Thank you
No.
for helping me with this, because it's a whole idea about, I loved your statement about relative sincerity, what is it? Good intentions, relative sincerity. And how we do, you did say that, by the way.
Okay.
It was you were very wise, you sounded very, as you are, you're being very, very generous with us. But the whole idea of that you really have to be true to yourself. And that, that doesn't happen naturally sometimes.
Well, and also and maybe this is a little too esoteric, but like true to yourself, part of that is actually figuring out who you are.
Right.
Not who you ideally want to be. And also like it's one of the things I really dislike about our celebrity culture. It's like not just celebrity culture, but people do their best to cover up who they are. You know, like every indie rocker pretends to be way more cynical than they really are. Every rapper pretends to be way tougher than they really are. Every 19-year-old pop singer pretends to be way more sexy than they are. And like, the truth is, we're all messy human beings. We go to the bathroom, we get scared, and we die. You know, no one is exempt from that process. You know, the toughest rapper in the world is scared. The most disaffected indie rocker in the world truly cares about the reviews for his next record. The sexiest 19-year-old ingenue singer is deep down probably like a nerd who just wants to like hold her stuffed animal from when she was 7. You know, like we're all messy, sloppy human beings who at some point will pee on ourselves and die. So when people say like, be true to yourself, it's being true to that version of yourself, like the vulnerable, messy human part of yourself, you know, and like, which is also why like people make such an effort to look good, and it's just not that interesting anymore. You know, like, and if I see that 20-year-old singer and you can tell she's just spent 6 hours being made up and stylized, I'm like, you just look generic. Or the indie rocker who looks like every other indie rocker. It's like, just let yourself be who you are. It's so much more interesting than aspiring to some generic ideal that doesn't benefit anyone.
And you think if all of us took that into ourselves, how would translate to the way we would treat others,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, we would kind of be the world, the change of the world we want to be.